Well, hey everybody, it's Hudson. Welcome to this week's Approaching the Scene. In this video, I'm gonna kind of take on a few of the posts that I've seen on my YouTube feed and some questions that I've gotten via email and some things I've seen on other posts about Nikon's new mirrorless system and the lenses available for it. You know, I hear a lot of people complaining about, well, they only released a few kit f4 lenses. It's really not a complete system, because there's only, you know, a few f4 lenses and a few primes that are a little bit wider aperture. And I just kind of want to, you know, be the devil's advocate, call bullshit on that a little bit, just based on my experience over the last 6 months with the Nikon Z6, and then the last month and a half with the Z7, and the if you want to call it a kit lens, the f4 24-70. And I just got the 14-30, and I've been using the 50mm f1.8. So I have those three S-line Z specific lenses, and then I've been using the FTZ adapter with a lot of my great old Nikon f-mount Pro Glass and some of the newer lenses. And you know, I think that Nikon actually made a brilliant move with this. So I'll talk about why, I'll show some example images. And then at the end, I'm going to take a question. I've had a number of people who recently bought, you know, either the Nikon D500 or the D850, and they're like, oh my God, did I totally screw this up? You seem to love the Z cameras. And I'm going to tell you why I think that the D850 and the D500 are perhaps two of the most well-rounded cameras for what they're intended for, and why I mean, I think the D850 is, if you're going to have one camera, it's probably the best camera on the planet right now. And the truth is that whatever system you're working with, the cameras are so much better than they were just a few years ago. I mean, an entry-level camera in any one of the top brands, from Fuji to Olympus to Nikon, Canon, Sony, they're all way, way better than what the, you know, top pros were paying thousands of dollars for just a few years ago. So I mean, it's a really great time in photography. Whatever system you're working with, it's almost kind of hard to go wrong. So let me jump into why I think Nikon made a really good decision to build these f4 lenses as the first lenses and to do such a really good job of it. First of all, I've been shooting with this 24-70 a lot. It's just kind of a knock-around lens. And I originally bought this camera, the Z6 actually, that I'm filming this with, alongside this lens as a kit, kind of half expecting not to like either one of them. I'm kind of a diehard DSLR guy. I've used a lot of Sony stuff. I've owned, you know, the A7S, the A6300, the A6500. I've dabbled in Fuji's mirrorless system. I've played a lot with Olympus's, and I just always kind of missed the actual optical viewfinder, and I felt like it was getting in between me and the image, particularly in lower light situations. It was almost like looking at a kind of a bad TV screen through a small window. And I will say that the minute I started looking through this, I realized it was a game changer. And then subsequently, I've looked through Sony's A9 and A7R III, and now I hear that Panasonic's full frame system has spectacular viewfinder, maybe the best of the bunch. And they are kind of game changers. I absolutely love working through these really beautiful, detailed, crisp, high resolution, fast refreshing screens. I mean, they're just a game changer. It actually is easier to work in low light because it's magnifying it without giving me noise and grain, and it's crystal clear and colorful, and everything looks great. It's actually, now when I pick up the DSLRs, I kind of miss that viewfinder. And I'll say that this f4 lens, this 24-70, is one of the sharpest zoom lenses of any focal length that I've ever worked with. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I'm going to jump in to Lightroom here, and I've got some images open. You know, when you first get the camera, this is back in November when I first got the Z6 and the 24-70, the first thing you do is wake up in the morning and take a photo of your cat, right? And I was pretty blown away. I went, wow, you know, the center of that lens is really, really sharp. You know, that night I took a picture of my other cat, that's Carl, this is Gray. And, you know, I'm like, wow, it's really sharp. But not only that, you know, the Z6 has just incredible low light ability. And I was able to see what I was doing through that mirrorless viewfinder. I mean, you look here, I'm working at 22,800 ISO. Crazy sharp, crazy clean, very little noise. And I started to get kind of excited. But at the same time, you know, I'm using the Z6, the 24 megapixel camera. I wondered, you know, how sharp is this lens really? It's small, it's light, it weighs a tiny fraction of what most of the big 2.8 24 to 70 traditional lenses weigh. And I've actually never carried those around just because they're so heavy, and my preference is to have the big 2.8 70 to 200 and an ultra wide like the 14 to 24, and then a couple primes in the middle like a little 51.8, a 21.8, a 35 f2, something like that. So this is kind of an exciting lens for me because all of a sudden I've got that 24 to 70 knock around focal length that's light, and you can just hang it on your back out in the park with the kids, and it's not this big beefy thing bouncing off your leg, and yet it's razor sharp, even wide open. So, you know, when I got the Z7, the first big trip that I took it on was down to Charleston, South Carolina, and then Cuba. I did a workshop in Charleston, and I was out photographing the Ravenel Bridge the last night of the workshop, and I was working with some students that were diehard enough. We had great weather throughout the workshop, but some rain and wind started coming up that last night. And I went out there and I was helping others, and I thought, you know, I've shot this bridge before with a crescent moon rising, but, you know, let's just test what the Z7 with the 24 to 70 will do. So, you know, I set up, I'm at 32.5 millimeters here. I remember shooting it with my Zeiss 35 before, and I'm thinking it's not going to be anywhere near close. Well, this is the edge of the frame. At f4, if you'll look here, I've done very little, a slight amount of post-production. We're still looking at the raw file here. And the detail on these cables and up under the bridge work, you know, as you move into the middle, maybe it's even a little more sharp, but I mean, we can even zoom in here. Let's see, I'll go into this left panel. Let's zoom in 2 to 1. Oh, that's 1 to 2, hold on, let's go 2 to 1. I mean, that is insanely sharp, and that's with the Z7. This is all 46 megapixels. That's pretty crazy for edge detail. You know, if you come back and you zoom in to say, or go down, stop down to f5.6, I did take a shot at f5.6 too. It's even a little bit more sharp, but I'm still blown away at how sharp edge to edge this lens is wide open. How easy it is to focus this camera in low light with that mirrorless viewfinder, and how much I miss it when I pick up the DSLR. Now, again, for those of you with the latest and greatest DSLR, wait, I'm going to answer a question about that at the end. Because I don't think this camera is perfect for everything. And I do think that my Nikon D850, if I had to have one camera, that would be the one. I'll address that a little bit later. So let's just look through, you know, some of the photos that I've taken with this 24 to 70. I'm just out cross-country skiing with my wife and the kids. I'm not taking my big camera kit. I just have this little camera with this little f4 lens. You know, I love the way that when you're close, zoomed into 70, and you're at f4, that the focus falls off. It's really quite beautiful. I have no problem tracking action. It's just, you know, action in burst mode where you want to get a whole bunch of frames a second. That's where I have trouble with the Z cameras. But tracking action and firing a frame or two here and there, I've had no problems with. These are, you know, running around with that lens in Cuba. One thing I'm not a huge fan of, and that's usually the case with most zoom lenses, is the Sunstar. I think the Sunstar is a little mucky. You know, it's not terrible. Here's a Death Valley shot with it. I probably had a little bit of gunk on my lens, so some of that ghosting could be because of that. But, you know, it's just not nearly as good as my preferred Sunstar lens, which is Nikon's 20mm f1.8. I have the f mount of that. And, you know, I've taken a bunch of shots with that on my Z cameras. That's where Nikon's really brilliant, in my opinion. You've got this whole stable of f-glass, of really high-grade pro f-glass, and all of the best lenses mount through this simple adapter, and I haven't noticed any performance degradation, certainly no image quality degradation running through this adapter. The autofocus is just as quick, you know, so long, again, you've got some tracking issues or whatever, but it locks focus just as fast, it focuses just as fast. Everything seems to work just as well through the Z-mount system, but you get that beautiful viewfinder. And so I've got some shots here. This is my favorite Sunstar lens. This is the 20mm 1.8 adapted on the Z7. You know, here's another shot of that. This is with the Z6 in Death Valley. I mean, that's a tough time to be out doing Sunstars and really high contrast, sun up kind of high. That lens is just amazing. I can't recommend For you Nikon shooters, another lens more highly for doing sun stars with than the 20mm 1.8. It's usually in my bag just because of that, because it works great as a prime wide angle, low light lens, and it does spectacular sun stars. Here's some shots up on the Z camera with my 70-200 f2.8, you know, one of my absolute favorite f-mount lenses. No problem working with that lens on the Z camera. It's just as great as it is on my DSLRs. One of my favorite lenses to run around doing street photography with, or portraits, the 105 1.4. I shot that a lot in Cuba on the Z7 and in Charleston, and you know, it did a really wonderful job for me. One of my favorite images from Cuba. And look at how nice that is. It's not like Nikon's missing any lenses for this system. You just get this adapter. And it's not like adapters for other systems where you're trying to get some other manufacturer's lens shoehorned onto the camera. The Nikon lenses work pretty much as expected. I mean, I have noticed, again, no performance degradation mounted up on the Z cameras. The thing that they did build was a really nicely mated, fast f4 small, not fast, but lightweight f4 lens that fits this camera really well. It's just well suited to it. I love the fact it retracts and gets smaller to go in your bag. It's really well weather sealed. I've had it in stupid conditions, blowing wind and rain, and I've had no problems. It's gasketed coming into the camera. Everything seems really well sealed. I've also been working quite a bit with the 50mm 1.8, usually doing these videos. It's a rare moment. I don't have that on my Z6 filming this video because I'm actually using the F-mount 1.8 through the FTZ adapter. It kind of stutters around. If I was to walk around, you'd notice that it's a kind of a stuttery autofocus tracking with the facial recognition. This one's super smooth and silent. But I also really like the way that this lens works in low lit conditions, just knocking around. It's another great street lens. I love the way the focus falls off, you know, and it's, again, razor sharp. I think sharper than the old f1.8. This is basically straight out of the camera. I think I pulled the shadows up a little bit of just a street scene in Cuba in super low light using this lens wide open. Here's some shots with the brand new 14-30. I haven't had enough time to really give a full review of this lens yet. I can't rave about it the same way I do the 24-70, but it's shaping up to be just about as good. I'll be doing something in a month or so once I've really shot the heck out of it. You know, I've shot thousands of frames with this one, shot maybe 100 frames with this one last weekend at the Cannon Beach workshop that I did here on the North Oregon coast. But you can see it's throwing a little bit better sun star. It's still not as good as the 20mm, but it's a zoom lens. I think it's a little bit nicer than the 14-24's sun star, a little bit cleaner. It's nice and razor sharp. You know, I enjoyed working with it in low light. It'd be nice if it was a little bit wider, but there's no reason you can't adapt any of the F-mount Astro lenses to this system. And I honestly, for doing Astro stuff, I don't want these focus by wire lenses that they're making for the S-line system. I'd rather have a manual focus with a hard stop at infinity. I'll talk more about that when I talk more about astrophotography. But again, it's as close as one of these adapters. But I've enjoyed using that lens too. So for me, I think Nikon was really brilliant giving us these ultra light f4 zooms to match these ultra light, really high quality cameras, and everything weather sealed and built like a tank. I mean, I've been running around with this lens on, not, you know, I'm rough on my gear. I take good care of it, but I don't baby it, and it still looks brand new. So I'm happy as can be, and I love the results working with this lens. Now, I have had a couple people say, oh my God, you know, you cheer-led the D850 when it came out. You said it was the greatest camera on the planet. You were suspicious of the Z cameras. Now it seems like in your videos, you're all about the Z cameras. Well, I'm going to say that, you know, I'm really enjoying having the Z6 to do video with and work in really low light conditions, and I can't wait to do astrophotography with it this summer. And I love having the Z7 for really high quality landscapes and working through this viewfinder. There's some quirks. I hope that they fix that depth of field issue where I can't zoom in to live view at apertures smaller than f5.6. That's a real bummer that sometimes will make me reach for the D850 because its live view does let me do that. The other thing about the D850 is, you know, if I could only have one camera, I think the D850 is the camera to have. And the reason is it's spectacular for landscape. You throw it into crop mode, it shoots 9 frames a second, keeps track of everything with that same amazing autofocus tracking system as the D5. You got group autofocus. It doesn't miss a shot, doesn't miss focus on anything. You know, I'm gonna wait to do a longer term review of these Z cameras till after they come out with the mid-May firmware update that's supposed to improve autofocus and put eye detect autofocus on it, because I think that's only fair. But you know, right now the autofocus for moving subjects and burst mode, fast action, sports, wildlife, it's not up there. I'm gonna reach for either the D850 or the D500. Why do I say the D500 isn't the one camera for everything? Well, it's lower megapixels. You know, you can do panoramas and get high megapixel images, but in a single shot, this camera gives you 46 megapixels. It's extremely good in low light. The live view is great. It's got a big buffer, fast processing, backlit controls, lets you zoom in live view at any aperture and check your hyperfocal distance and whether everything that you want to be in focus is in focus. And you can chop down to DX mode, the crop sensor mode, get more reach out of your lenses and be shooting at about the same 20 megapixels that you would with the D500 at maybe 1 frame less per second. So it really is kind of the one camera to rule them all if you want to have one camera right now. There's nothing it doesn't do well. So, you know, don't feel bad if you have this camera. I think it's the best one built so far. Now, the future is definitely mirrorless, and I think you're going to see all of the R&D and you're going to see all of the development moving forward headed towards these Z cameras. For Nikon and for Canon with their R cameras, and basically everybody's headed this way because there's more that you can do. They're going to be able to track things on the sensor in ways that you can't with an optical autofocus system. The autofocus is going to get better. Everything's going to get better. Everything's going to get faster. Everything's going to get more incredible. You're going to start seeing the kind of computational photography that we're seeing on our phones bleed into these mirrorless systems. It's definitely the wave of the future. But you know, it may be a model away, it may be 2 models away. At this point, if I could only have one camera, it's still the 850. And I'm considering selling it because the one thing that these don't do well is the action in sports at this point, and the D500 will do that for me. And you know, it's worth a little bit less, so I could increase my bank account more by selling the 850, keeping the 500, the Z6, and the Z7. But I think that if you only have one, that's the way to go. So again, you know, hit me in the comments. I'm sure people will have a few things to say about the content in this one. I stand by the fact that I think Nikon's been really brilliant with their lens roadmap. They're relying on the fact that this FTZ adapter adapts those f-mount lenses seamlessly. And what they've built is some really incredible f4 zooms. And honestly, you know, they've really knocked it out of the park in a way that the other manufacturers haven't with their lightweight f4 zooms. I'm not going to name any names, but this is a light, badass little system. All right, we'll see you next time.